Phil Goddard, welcome to Unbroken.
My gosh, thank you for inviting me. Delighted to be here. Thank you.
And from such a long way away, you're the second person this week that I've spoken to from the Southern Hemisphere. So thank you for
Yeah.
beaming your way all the way to Canada.
only just the southern hemisphere, I think. I don't know how far. We're pretty close to the equator here, and yes, almost the opposite side of the world, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you put a pencil through the globe.
I guess so. I guess so. I mean, I know. Actually, on the American East Coast is pretty much. I know from the time difference that's 12 hours, right? And I think ours is something like 15 or whatever. So as I could just,
Yes.
so I was just saying to you, I reckon I'm essentially on the next day, and I recommend it. Today's a
Yes.
good day.
Yes. Yeah. Isn't that a funny thing that we are in the present moment, and yet you're in Wednesday and I'm in Tuesday. I
I'm
love
sure
that.
there's some deeply profound lesson in there somewhere. I'm sure we can find it. Yes.
Yes, for sure. So while we begin, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got interested in the three principles?
Oh gosh, so probably like many who even listen or have come across the principles, I searched, didn't know what I was searching for most of my life. I got a background in electronics and technology, and for my first career was very much in technology. I spent 26 years in total in corporate, a lot of leadership positions, and I loved those. I had my first team leader role, albeit part of a small team, 4 or 5 people, in 1991. And I just loved that I had some responsibility, as we all have anyway, of course, but some influence, as we all have as well, over other people. This was a formal responsibility. So it was really like from there that I really got, I guess, aware of my interest and curiosity in people.
Mm.
And yeah, I was doing all that stuff about reading leadership books, personal development books, and stuff. But it really kicked off in 1998. Like a spiritual exploration kicked off then when my first marriage broke down. And my brother in law at the time handed me M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled. It's a beautiful, beautiful book because he opens the book with the line, "Life is difficult," and then spends the rest of the book explaining how once we can truly accept with grace that it actually becomes a little bit easier. So in answer to your question, I was actually reading, I was on holiday in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt in March 2004, so 19 years ago. I was reading The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, and I don't, I haven't gone back to this line for many years, so I might have even been quoting it incorrectly, but it doesn't matter because it's a line in the book which says something like, "Between stimulus and response is a gap, and in that gap lies your ultimate freedom." And I dropped the book, and I've referred to that as my drop the book moment. Like I'm on the sun lounge, and I was actually shocked because I just, in that moment, huh, I'm creating my experience. I just saw in that moment, I'm creating my experience. Gives me goosebumps now, just even relaying that story. Um, well, so that really started an exploration, like looking in that direction, like who else is teaching this, and came across Michael Neal. Started listening to his Hay House radio show in 2007, and which I think is about the time that he'd come across the principles. So I didn't come across the principles then, but when I came across the principles via Michael Neal, it was like, okay, what a beautiful way to articulate this understanding that I felt I had seen something of. I love that. Sid's it's a very concise, simple way of describing how we experience life, how we create our experience of life, and essentially who we are. So yeah, that was my journey into the principles. And of course, I feel like I've gone full circle. I've had a number of times which I will call insights where it's like, oh my God, I've seen something deeper since. There was something. So when was that? Like I say, 2007, 2008, coming across the actual principles. But even nearly 10 years after that, I had a conversation with Dick and Bettinger in 2017. So I'd been around, I felt I'd been around this understanding a long time. And that was, I really got a holy moly moment then of just seeing something deeper. And even since then, it's like nuances to it. So, yeah, it feels like it's been a long time, and also like it's only really recently because of the subtleties that we can see. Like I used to chuckle at people as well that really, come on, it's that simple. How can you suddenly see something deeper? And it like the best insights are where you see to me, it looks like the best insights are where you see something new, but there aren't any new words. It's like, well, if I told you what I'm seeing, I'm going to be saying exactly what I've said 10 years ago. But it's like, wow. Anyway, yes, that's my story in summary of the principles.
Well, I love that you connected your enjoyment of working with people in the tech world, and of course now you're a coach, and I think that's just such an interesting journey. One wouldn't normally maybe, yeah, put those two things together, but clearly, yeah, it was you were on a spectrum, sort of, if that's the right way to describe it.
It was, yeah. Well, for sure. I get it. And it was only a couple of years ago that somebody who was coaching me helped me to see that I have been coaching a lot longer than I thought I had, because right from the off, like I say, 1991. I wanted to be the best leader, and I wanted people to love me, which actually they did. And I would have either weekly or monthly, just very regular one-on-one meetings with people in my teams. And I did that all throughout my leadership career. And looking back, I can see, yeah, that was definitely coaching. I would encourage people to bring whatever they have going on. And in fact, I think there was at times when I was a much better coach, whatever that means, but I was definitely a more present coach with these people at times then than some of the times during my coaching training. Did a lot of coaching training in the US when I was trying to be somebody. I thought I had to be a certain kind of coach. So yeah, I can see, oh my gosh, I have been coaching over 30 years, because definitely having regular conversations like that, some would be very intimate, but some beautiful conversations. But it hadn't occurred to me that what I was doing, I didn't know what I was doing. It was just one-on-ones where people just brought whatever they had going on. Well, that just definitely sounds like coaching to me.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, for sure. So I mentioned to you that I've been reading your book, Tasting Mangoes, recently, which I just loved. And so I'm going to go to a couple of things that I found in the book now that I found really interesting. So one of the things you say is that often personal development and spiritual teachings are actually asking us to transcend the human experience, but that it's in the human experience that we find, so much treasure, as it were. You didn't use that word. I'm using that word. And I so agree with that, but I wondered if you could just expand on that a little bit for us.
I've kind of had this vision, this dream that we arrive at the metaphorical pearly gates, and if it's St. Peter there who's like checking off his lists and whatever. And I think for certainly the first 40 years of my life, 54 now, but definitely for the first 40 odd years, I think I might get reprimanded. Like, what the hell were you doing? You went there to be there. You didn't go there to try and escape. You went there to experience everything that it is to be human. And having said that, I can also see that this urge, this desire to want to transcend, whatever perhaps we mean by that, maybe I'll come back to that, is also very natural. It's also very natural. But I think for me, I've kind of fallen in love again with being human. Hence, part of my brand, I guess you would say, is loving being human. That pretty much summarizes what I help people with. So where is the magic? Oh my gosh, an overused analogy. Okay, maybe you want to edit this bit out. It's so overused, but it's also so perfect. Like the wave and the ocean, like the magic's also in the waves, isn't it? Right? The
Hmm.
magic's in those waves. Like I love where I live now in Bali. Actually, is there's the calmest ocean probably on the island. So I love that. I love floating in that. But there
Mm.
are people out there surfing right in the distance and stuff. Like the magic of that. And yeah, I think I might even say that there's some magic even in the suffering. Gosh, I could talk about this a lot. I'm just trying to think. Well, what do I want to summarize? Because generally, I'll be talking about this for a year in conversation with people, right? So,
Yeah.
what could I summarize in a 30 or 40 minute conversation around this? I've come to see, and again, it's funny how it comes right back to that very first spiritual book that I read. I've come to see that once I stopped resisting aspects of being human, including the suffering, that the absence of the resistance, in the absence of resistance, love arose. Love arises in the absence of resistance, and there's a magic in that. And I think even that desire to transcend really is coming from a feeling that, well, this should, or indeed could, be different. I don't know if this is right or wrong. Maybe I've got it completely the wrong way around. And now when I get to those pearly gates, Peter says, "You had it nailed on. You spent 40 years trying your best. I thought you were going to make it. And then you gave up." I don't know. How can we ever know?
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. No, I love that. Um, and and I think too, you're so right about it just being human nature, to try to avoid sufferings. And I really understand why we do that. Um, and yet yeah, if we just kind of lean in a little more, I think there is so much beauty to be found there, and less suffering when there's less resistance, for sure.
I think whatever we have going on, resistance acts as a suffering multiplier.
Yeah.
It's funny because I guess if I was to have any gripe about how the three principles are taught, um, I see I see them being taught as a means to reduce our suffering.
Mm.
Whereas, as far as I can tell, and listen to a lot of Sid Banks stuff, that Sid was it's all really descriptive rather than prescriptive. So
Hmm.
the teaching of the principle is often used as learn this and then you'll suffer less. And I think that has us come from a place that's not the most helpful, because this reducing in suffering, and quite frankly, it's not like the disappearing of all suffering. It really is there's something that eases around it, and it's like a contradiction that the suffering just becomes easier through understanding. It's like I haven't done anything. I've not even tried to suffer less. And I had Aaron Turner, excuse me, Aaron Turner speaking on a podcast a year or two ago, and he said he can always tell when somebody's relatively new to the understanding, because he'll talk to them about the principles, and they'll say something like, "Oh yeah, it's been beautiful. Had a beautiful impact on my life. However, I still notice that I'm experiencing sadness, anger, anxiety, or whatever." Whereas he says that people who have been in the understanding a while come to see that, yes, that's it. And the phrase he used, which I loved, and so I've stolen many times since, is you can't escape the system. Like
Mm.
this is all part of the gig, which is the language I use. It's like, yeah, this is it. This is the heartbreak and whatever. That's all part of the gig.
Yeah.
It's part of the gig.
Yeah, I truly agree. Um, yeah, I was going to say there was something I used to think about, which was that it's kind of like we're trying to rig the game if we try to avoid the things that are naturally happening within it. And yeah, that kind of defeats the purpose, as it were. I think, who knows? So I'm yeah, I'm gonna go back to tasting mangoes and ask you, there was this lovely quote, so I'm gonna quote you to yourself, if that's okay. Where you said, "You just might find that you are looking for," sorry, I'm gonna start again. "You just might find what you are looking for when you notice how your search is the very thing that is obscuring your view of it. So I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit and maybe relate it to trying to let go of an unwanted habit, because that's what we talk about here a lot on Unbroken.
Oh, I'm glad you've added the second part, actually, because that definitely will help in my explanation. So here's the thing. If I search for something, my premise is I don't have it, or I can't yet see it, or maybe it's detached from me in some way. And so there's a phrase, there's a guy, William Whitecloud, and I continue to credit him because the phrase that I heard, it just had such a profound impact, where he says, what was it, 4 or 5 words? Compensating strategy for perceived inadequacies. We employ throughout life various compensating strategies for perceived inadequacies. And I can see how any time that I employ a compensating strategy, my perceived inadequacy, the perception of that inadequacy gets strengthened by the action that I'm actually taking. Right? And that's happening at pretty deep levels. Like, that's the message to my subconscious. You know, because you're inadequate in this way, you need to do this. It's like it's really strengthening that. So even our searching for love, that's having a deep psychological impact in us that we don't have love. And that, you know, that can apply as well to peace. Like if I'm searching for peace, that means I don't have it. And that's why I continue to search. And yet, because I'm searching, it strengthens the belief that I don't have it. And so that also strengthens my experience of it. So that's really what I'm pointing to in that quote. And I think habits, particularly like overeating and stuff, I think there's very often more to them than just that, because there's so I know that I've had at various times not the most healthy relationship with food. Sometimes I think I have it nailed, and then I can catch myself using food as something other than nourishment, I guess. But it might be I might use it for emotional nourishment. In fact, side note here, I think we could wipe out obesity in a generation if we stopped, as parents, if we stopped using food as a reward mechanism. Right? So that's a side note. But the thing is, food becomes quite complex because we have an emotional relationship with food, other than, you know, it being fuel and nourishment for our bodies. So I think that whole overeating thing, generally, in my experience, when I've delved into this, both in my own experience and with clients, it's never really actually about the overeating, right? That's a byproduct. That's a coping strategy. The overeating is a coping strategy. So we want to look at, well, what's the perceived inadequacy, the perceived absence? What is it? And it can be, for sure, like, oh, I'm lonely, so I'm eating. Well, okay, so feeling lonely, completely natural. What is it? So is there a perceived inadequacy that I can't deal with the loneliness? So there can be many different things to look at there, but the overeating thing is not really it. It's really what's behind that.
Yes. Oh, thank you for saying that. Yeah, the title of my most recent book is It's Not About the Food. So
Right,
that's,
perfect.
yeah, I totally agree. So in your book, one of the things, shifting gears slightly, one of the things you come back to a couple of different times is your relationship with your dad, and how getting curious about him was a big moment for you. And I wondered if you could share a little bit about that, because I thought it was so impactful for any relationship, not just with a parent.
Gosh, and I'm just noticing as well, even the emotion in me is quite alive with this one, because you know what? So I didn't like my dad for all of my childhood and the vast majority of my adult life. It wasn't until I was 48, right, that I had this moment, which is kind of funny because I thought I'd done some work before then, and I was like, yeah, I've forgiven him. And I remember a girlfriend I had years ago was saying, "No, there's still more for you to see here." It's like she could see it. She could see it. I'm like, yeah, yeah, okay, it looks like that to you, but she was absolutely spot on. Well, I I think the emotion, by the way, is because I just came. I arrived back in Bali in February. I'd been back to England for a few months and in Greece as well. And so I say goodbye again once again to my dad, who's now 88. And
Mm.
like my plan is perhaps to be in Bali for a year. So there's thinking there, and it's like, oh, okay.
Mhm.
Well, I did not enjoy. I didn't enjoy my dad, and in fact, he got a really bad press in my first book, Musings on Love, and I even used the term abuse.
Mm.
I had this moment of I've been seeing more and more and more and more and more the role of my stories. Right, so you probably heard Byron Katie says no two people have ever met. And what she's basically pointing to is that we only experience our story of the other person. That's a client of mine recently when I said to her, there's 6 people in your marriage. There's you and your husband. Then there's your husband's story of you and your story of your husband. And then there's your story of you and your husband's story of him. So
Well
there's
said.
6 people. So
Wow.
I realized in a moment, I thought, I've got all this stuff going on. I won't use a word that you might have to bleep out. But anyway, I had all this stuff going on about my dad. Who knows where the thought came from? What's it like to really be him, though? I was at his, and we just had, talking about my book and stuff, and I just realized I don't really know what it's like to be him. I could imagine what it was like being me in his situation, and I imagined what it was like for the story, my story of my dad in that situation, and it was, laced with lots of shoulds and musts and what have you, and I just noticed, yeah, but I've never spoke to him about it. I've never asked him, how did you feel? Dad, when you got home from a long day at work, there's 4 of us children, you got home and I said, I remember you getting home and having your dinner separate from us because it was too late for us.
Mm.
And he would have his dinner and put his headphones on. And for 30 odd years since then, I've been saying, God, how out of order was he to just, block out his family, right? That was my story. How did
Mhm.
that feel? And he admitted he found it tough. He found it hard being a
Mm.
provider, being really tired, and then expected to be there for, for his children. I mean, I have to say, I do chuckle at people who say who've never been a parent yet, and they're like they're about to be, and they're like, oh yeah, no, we get it. Like, no, you don't.
Yeah.
You don't get it. So I just started asking, what was that like for you?
Yeah.
In essence, what I was getting to know were what were his. I could see his coping strategies for life and for how he was feeling,
Mhm.
and realize. I mean, this is a kind of phrase that's used very much in the principles, is the innocence of that and just doing what makes sense. And that leads on to something else about forgiveness, because it's like, where I was coming from before was like, oh, what he did was wrong.
Mhm.
But in my understanding, in my moral high ground, I can understand that made sense to him. So, yes, I forgive him. However, when you have a real depth of understanding, I can see that he was innocent. And
Mhm.
therefore, the condemnation, well, it was the condemnation was unnecessary, and without condemnation, forgiveness is unnecessary. It was like it just made sense to me. I just started to really get to know, well, this is yet another layer, but I started to get to know who my dad thought he was.
Mm.
Right, because all I'd got up
Mhm.
to that point was who I thought my dad was and who I thought my dad should be. Well, I started to get to know who he thought he was.
Mhm. Wow. And I'm so curious, your dad is obviously British, so pretty stiff upper lip, I'm imagining. Um, was he Was he open to your curiosity?
I'm amazed by it because it's fun. I can probably summarize. We never had any deeper meaningfuls. We
Mm-hmm.
never had any conversations really about feelings. In fact, leading up to this kind of breakthrough moment, I'd had this what I found a very painful breakup with somebody, and at the same time, just looping back to what I said earlier, it was like I was utterly heartbroken at this breakup, and yet at the same time, I could see, yeah, this is cool. It's fine. It's let it be, let it be. Even the sobbing in the fetal position in my lounge, like there was still a level of awareness that, yeah, this is all natural. Let that be. Anyway, I got to a point. I was round his one day, and he just said, "Well, how are you doing?" And I just burst out crying. 40-odd-year-old man.
Mm.
And he said, "Oh, come on now, come on now. Let's not be having that here." Because that is that whole like stiff upper lip attitude. And we never had any conversations about feelings. There wasn't that kind of affection there. And there's a bit of me, I'm kind of chuckling about that. I remember at the time. and things have developed since then. I don't even know if he's aware of this. I've shared this before in other interviews and what have you. But since like these conversations, I used to go to his house and I would sit on the sofa and he would sit at a chair, which is kind of at right angles. And I go around now and probably 9 times out of 10, he comes and sits on the sofa with me. And I bet he doesn't even realize that he's doing that.
Oh, that's lovely. Wow. Oh, that's beautiful. And I think I resonate with that a lot because I can really relate. When my dad came home from work, he didn't put headphones on, he drank. Same, right? Same impulse. He was, we do what occurs to us in the moment in order to cope with whatever's going on in our thinking and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I can completely relate to that. And the reason I asked that question about whether he was open to your curiosity or not, my dad has passed away now, but I'm, he would never have answered a question like that if I had asked. So it's lovely that your dad has moved onto the couch with you.
I don't think he was comfortable about it because it was like
Yes.
uncharted territory for him. But he accepted that book with such grace when I offered it to him. Like, I was excited, my first book, and I forewarned
Mm.
him, Dad, you don't get. In fact, I written stuff in the book. My first first couple of books really was stuff that I'd written over a period of years, and I forewarned him that there's stuff that I've written in there and published which I would probably write differently today. And after reading it, he was so excited to read it, took on board my advance warning of caution, and just called me up and said, "Well, he said, I'd like to talk to you about some of the things in the book," because
Wow.
he actually, there was something that I think stirred in him. And this is what I see in all of us. Do you know, like we all do want to be known. We want to be seen, heard, understood, and indeed validated. And it's like, oh my God, how much personal development, relationship coaching do we see that says we should transcend that, overcome that, deal with that? It's like, no, this is, we're not designed to just live alone. And it's like, this is again part of the gig is to be relating with each other, with nature, and having those innate needs. I've given up on trying to transcend hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. Like, yeah, I have a need to be validated. I have a need to be seen, heard, understood, as did my dad. So, of course, he would have never used those words, but I really honor him, and I'm so grateful for him for honoring that desire to want to have that dialogue. Because up till then, and indeed sometimes since, he's very stubborn. I am too. I can see like there's stuff I get from him. I don't know if it's generic or conditioning, but like, I can be really stubborn too. Is that he didn't like to be wrong, but he did. That's probably my favorite thing altogether out of the Stephen Covey book. Is it habit 3? I don't know, 4. Seek first to
To
understand,
understand. Yeah.
then be understood. And like,
Mm.
if you want to know how to transform any relationship, professional, personal, if you take that, seek first to understand, then be understood. That's that whole curiosity thing as well. So yeah, in that moment, so grateful, because it totally transformed my relationship with him. We hug each other. It's just, I have to say, we're so different. Like it's not like, oh, he's a best buddy that I love hanging out with. Like, we're so different. And so he's someone that I wouldn't be choosing just to hang out with. But what again, instead of me resisting how he is and entertaining all of my stories, right, in the absence once again of that resistance, there is this very natural love. Like, the guy's my dad, and I just there and again, once we start on the thought train. So once I started really appreciating, oh my gosh, how hard it was for him, and what a wonderful provider he was. Of course, he's there's lots of things he did that I was aghast. Like, he disowned me for 10 years, right? And I cannot imagine doing that to my son. Like, and yet we discussed that. He is talking about how it was with his second wife, the woman he left my mother for. I'm thinking, my gosh, that sounds like an impossible situation. Like, he's having to choose between his wife and his son. Anyway, yes, I think we digressed a little bit. I'm just super, super grateful that, and I don't know for sure, but I have seen it many times since, that if I am curious, there's something in that. Like, I can always go first when I'm coaching somebody around their relating. If I want more intimacy, the number one requirement of intimacy is safety. So am I providing the safety for intimacy? Am I curious about the other person? Am I willing to go first? Will I be the change that I wish to see in how I'm relating? So classic, isn't it? And it all fits together. So yeah, just super grateful for everything that led up to that moment, and indeed what's blossomed since.
Oh, gorgeous. We've mentioned your books a few times, and one of the things I wanted to ask about was the writing process. So you mentioned there that some of them were writings over a long period of time. Tell us about, just tell us about that, what you enjoy about it, what motivates you, that kind of thing, to share what you see.
Whatever is alive, like the
Yeah.
energy. I can be inspired by BS. In fact, I've written about being inspired by BS. It's like really whatever is alive. And there are some things, I published a book just of poetry. I had this moment one day. I think it was about 3:30 in the afternoon, where I thought to myself, I wonder if I've got enough poetry to publish a poetry book. And so I then started getting stuff together. And by the following morning, that was published on Amazon. I just put it all together, put a cover and whatever. So I can talk about that, like with my clients. You say, oh, I'd love to publish a book, but it would take too long. Oh, yeah, okay, you can do it in less than 24 hours if you want to. So that some of that poetry has just, I can read it. In fact, Facebook's memory sometimes just reminds me, and I can read stuff that I've written, and I think, oh wow, and I can even see stuff in it deeper that I didn't see when I was writing it. So it's that cliche thing about writing, this stuff that can come through us, like the genius, the true self, spirit, whatever names we want to use. There's that. There's some writing that I'm really opinionated, just like my dad. I'm really opinionated about stuff. That the difference that's happened is I have a very casual, very light, humorous, amusing relationship with my opinions, like, because I can see that they're not correct. That's all they are. They're just my opinions. But there's stuff that I can feel energized about that I will write and can be in a bit of a rant. I did something like that quite recently, actually, about some aspects of the coaching profession. So that was genuine. And here's the thing: if writing becomes just really the vehicle of expression, I noticed when there are times when I try to write, never works out very well. And in fact, a friend of mine reflected back to me exactly that. He said, some of your writing is just like mind blowing. And yet he was saying, I can tell occasionally I see something from yours and I think, yeah, you tried with that, haven't you? You tried to make a point. So there isn't a single reason why I write. it kind of happens. And in a way, I feel all 5 of my books are a bit of a cheat, because I say, well, I haven't written any books. I've written stuff, and the stuff that's in those books I've published elsewhere, predominantly on social media, and sometimes I've written for online magazines a few times, and then I've just like collated stuff, put it together, and put it in a book. Interesting, I'm noticing now there are 2 books that I do have in progress, and I'm kind of like determined not to publish that stuff. I'm going to write a book, and it's not going as well. I'm not finding that so easy. So I have to like ease up on that and just let the writing flow. So writing's not really something I do, it's something I allow.
Oh, nice. Oh, lovely. That's well said. I was in Portland, Oregon recently with Michael Neal and Barbara Patterson, and Michael has just published Mavis Karn's first book. And so he told a little story there. He said, I went to her and said, Mavis, I'd love for you to write a book and share your wisdom and that kind of thing. And she said, I don't know how to write a book. There's no way. And he said, no, but you do know how to write letters. And so that's what it is. It's beginning, of course, with her most famous letter to the children, the boys in prison. And that's what it is, a collection of her
Beautiful.
letters. Yeah, it's lovely. It's a really nice book. So we're just about running out of time here. I do want to ask you about Bali, though, and what drew you there and what keeps you there.
I moved into an apartment in Ipswich in England. I woke up one day and realized I didn't want to be in my marriage anymore. I've been married and divorced twice. And I was just so clear. So I moved into an apartment. It's like I had what would look like the dream life. Big, huge house, fast cars, eating at restaurants and whatever. And I kind of had enough of it. I didn't even want a garden. So it's like there was this, I went from this huge life to this small. I move into this apartment just for 6 months until I work out what I want to do with the rest of my life. And I was there for 9.5 years. Became a bit of a joke. Anyway, so Bali, I just came up in a conversation with a friend. There were a few things that happened. That, again, there's not a single answer to this. The predominant thing was that actually the move. There's 2 aspects. There's a moving to Bali. There's a moving away from England. There were some friendships that had evolved to this, or perhaps come to completion would be perhaps the most kind way of saying. And these were long-term friendships, 2 20-odd years, 1 30-odd years. We change, right? We evolve, and it just became really clear, okay, these friendships are complete. And so what was keeping me in England, other than family and what have you, there was less of that. And there was this thing in me that I'd always talked about it, of moving to somewhere warmer. And then I had a friendship with my partner for a number of years, actually. We met in a Facebook group. It might have even been a Michael Neal group, by the way. So we've been friends for a while. And then in early 2019, this friendship just became more, in that we were sharing more, talking more. And then we bumped into this point of like, well, we don't know if we want to cross this particular line. It was never any like flirtatious stuff, but there was a lot of love and affection there, and just felt like there's more to explore. So I came to Bali predominantly to get away from perhaps some sadness, quite frankly, of things that had completed in England, and to meet this beautiful young lady who I'm now in this life partnership with. I mean, that's been very, very bumpy. But yeah, the reasons really are twofold: the away from and the towards.
Oh, wow. So interesting. And there is a section in Tasting Mangoes where you sort of talk about for lack of a better way to put it, the pros and cons of Bali, the mosquitoes versus the nice warm evenings, the water versus the fresh fruit. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess that goes with anywhere we live.
I did that, like, again, looking for a place that I could call paradise, and I'm not really convinced it exists, but I definitely see that there's a state of mind that feels like paradise. But like all states of mind, it's not permanent; it's transient.
Right. Yes, yeah. All right, well, Phil, well, as we wrap up, is there anything you'd like to share that we haven't touched on yet?
Oh, I think we have touched on it, but I do want to labor the point because I invite people to really look at just how much time are we spending resisting what really are very natural aspects of being human,
Hmm.
and what might happen, what might be available to us, what experience of life might be available to us if if we just let up on some of that resistance. So here's the thing. I know she won't mind me sharing with you. It's anonymous, but somebody I know has experienced what anybody would call a betrayal.
Mm.
And so she was telling me on our call, I hate him. I feel like I hate him, and I don't want to. And I
Mm.
simply said, well, to me, under those circumstances, it feels like having those feelings of hatred is perfectly natural. And yet by then telling yourself, by resisting that, it's kind of like you're torturing yourself twice. How about you allow yourself to hate him to the best of your ability, to feel that hatred to the best of your ability? And we both kind of laughed at this, but like that, you know what, that's the same really with any feeling that we have. How about if we really allow that, if we really allow us to feel that to the best of our ability? Like, none of our feelings really need a coping strategy.
Mm.
They all really do pass. So yeah, that's what I just really invite people to look at, to see what's it like to stop resisting being human. And once again, the absence of love arises in the absence of resistance. I just invite people to consider what it'd be like to love being human.
Mm. Yes, yeah, well said. Thank you. So where can we find out more about you and your work?
I'm mostly active on Facebook.
Okay.
And so people can find my profile. I set up a domain which will just take you to my profile, fbphil.com. Will
Okay.
just take you to my Facebook profile. You can just follow me. I'm getting close to a Facebook friends list, so I might not accept a friend request, but you can certainly follow me and engage on there. My very out of date website does have my podcast on there, philg.com. And yeah, my email address is on my website. So yeah, I'm always delighted to hear from people if they've read something of mine that's touched them, or even if they don't like it. I'm also happy to hear from them.
Well, that's generous of you. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Phil, for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed talking with you. I've liked being this side of the whole podcast setup. So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Good. Oh, you're very welcome. Take care. Bye-bye.